The memorial service was held in the largest cargo bay of the Indomitable. The only space big enough to hold the surviving crew. Yunseok stood at the back of the assembly, watching as humans gathered to honor their fallen comrades. He had attended Velaran military funerals before. Solemn affairs conducted with rigid formality and emotional restraint. This was nothing like that. The humans wept openly, holding each other as names were read aloud. They shared stories of the dead, sometimes laughing through their tears at fond memories. They sang songs together, ancient melodies from their homeworld that spoke of loss and hope and the bonds between those who served together. Commander G1 stood at the front, her arm now in a proper medical sling, her face showing every year of her service as she addressed her crew. "We lost 437 souls in this battle," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent bay. "Mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, friends and lovers. And each one of them died so that others might live." She paused, and Yunseok saw her struggling to maintain composure. "I wish I could tell you that their sacrifice guaranteed a safer galaxy," she continued. "I wish I could promise that no other ship will ever face what we faced. But I cannot. What I can tell you is this: when the people of New Bizen look up at the stars tonight, they will do so as free beings, because of us, because of the ones we lost. And that matters." The crew responded with a sound that Yunseok had never heard before, a low rumbling affirmation that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than their throats. It was grief and pride and determination all woven together into a single note of defiance against death itself. After the service, Yunseok wandered the damaged corridors of the ship, processing everything he had witnessed. He found himself outside the medical bay, where Dr. Juan was finally resting after his marathon effort to save as many lives as possible. The old man looked up when Yunseok entered, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "I lost 23 of them," Juan said quietly. 23 people I could not save." "You saved over 200, Yunseok replied. "By any measure, that is a remarkable achievement." Juan shook his head. "You still do not understand us. Do you, observer?" "I am beginning to," Yunseok admitted, "though I am not certain my people will believe my report." "What will you tell them?" It was a question Yunseok had been asking himself since the battle ended. He had been sent to observe human combat capabilities, to analyze their tactics and weapons and strategic thinking. He could write a report full of technical details and statistical analyses. He could describe their ships and their training methods and their command structures, but none of that would capture what he had truly witnessed. "I will tell them the truth," he said finally. "That humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy." Juan raised an eyebrow. "Because of our weapons? Because you love each other too much to ever stop fighting." The doctor stared at him for a long moment, then smiled, a sad and knowing expression. "That might be the most accurate assessment of humanity I have ever heard from an outsider." Later that day, Sergeant Minji found Yunseok in an observation lounge, staring out at the stars. She sat down beside him without asking permission and placed a small object in his hand. It was a medal, a simple bronze disc with an inscription Yunseok could not read. "It belonged to Su Yian," Minji said. "She earned it for valor during a rescue operation last year. And I thought you should have it. Why would you give this to me?" "Because you were with her at the end," Minji replied. "Because you closed the door when she asked you to. And because someone should remember her besides us." Yunseok looked at the medal in his palm, feeling its weight. "Such a small thing to represent a life. I did not know her," he said. "Then learn about her," Minji suggested. "Ask her friends about her. Find out what made her laugh and what made her angry. And carry that with you when you leave." "That seems like a very human thing to do." "Maybe it is," Minji agreed. "But would that be so bad?" Seok had no answer for that when the Indomitable finally limped back to a consortium starbase for repairs. Seok, prepared to return to Valorine Space Commander G1, met him at the airlock. Looking much healthier than she had during the battle, but still bearing the invisible weight of all she had lost. "I hope your observation mission was informative," she said. "It was transformative." Seok replied honestly. "I came here expecting to document a primitive species, and instead I discovered something I cannot easily explain." "And what is that?" He thought about the question carefully before answering. "Among my people, we believe that emotion is weakness, that attachment leads to poor decisions, that the rational mind must always control the passionate heart." G1 nodded. Waiting for him to continue, "I have watched your crew sacrifice themselves for strangers, fight impossible battles for abstract ideals, and weep openly for their fallen friends, and by every Valaran standard. These are signs of an inferior species. But they are not, are they?" "No," Seok agreed. "They are signs of a species that understands something mine has forgotten. That life without love is merely existence, and that some things are worth dying for." G1 extended her hand. And this time, Seok did not hesitate to take it. "You are welcome aboard any human vessel, observer," she said. "Should you ever wish to return, I think I will take you up on that offer." 3 months later, Seok stood before the Valorine High Command, presenting his official report on human military capabilities. His superiors listened with barely concealed impatience as he described tactics and weapons, systems and command structures. When he reached his conclusions, however, the room went silent. "It is my professional assessment that humanity should be granted full consortium membership immediately," he stated. "Furthermore, I recommend that we seek a formal military alliance with their species." "On what basis?" demanded Commander Talvath, his 4 eyes narrowing with suspicion. "On the basis that they will never stop fighting for what they believe in, and I would rather have them as allies than enemies." His report was rejected. Classified as compromised by emotional contamination, his career was effectively ended, and Seok did not care 1 week after his dismissal. He submitted a formal request to emigrate to human space. When asked to explain his decision, he offered only a single statement that would later become famous throughout the consortium. "I was sent to observe humans in combat, and I learned what it means to be alive. So now I'm going to live." The transport ship that carried him away from Valorant space was small and cramped and nothing like the elegant vessels of his homeworld. But as Seok watched the stars streak past, holding Su Yan's medal in his hand, he felt something he had never experienced before. He felt free and somewhere ahead, waiting in the vast darkness between worlds. The humans were still out there, still fighting, still loving, still refusing to accept any outcome where innocent people suffered. He was going to join them, not as an observer, but as a friend. The Indomitable shook violently as another volley from the Keth mothership slammed into its weakening shields, and Seok grabbed a support beam to keep from being thrown across the corridor. Emergency lights bathed everything in red, and the sound of alarms had become so constant that his mind was beginning to filter them out as background noise. He had made his way back to the command bridge to observe the battle. But what he found there was not the panic he expected. Commander G1 stood at her station with blood running down her face from a cut on her forehead, calmly issuing orders as if she were conducting a routine training exercise. Her left arm hung at an odd angle, clearly broken, but she refused to leave for medical treatment. "Hull breach on Deck 7, an officer reported. "Damage control teams are responding. Reroute power from non-essential systems to the forward shields," G1 ordered. "And someone get me a firing solution on their engine section." The tactical display showed the situation in stark detail. The Keth mothership was nearly 3 times the size of the Indomitable, with heavier weapons and stronger armor by every calculation Yunseok could make. The human carrier should have been destroyed within the first 15 minutes of engagement. Yet here they were, 40 minutes into the battle, still fighting. How are you surviving this? Yunseok asked Lieutenant Commander Sunho, who was coordinating damage control from a secondary console. The officer glanced at him with exhausted eyes. We are not trying to beat them, he explained. We are trying to cripple their engines so they cannot escape. And if we can do that, reinforcements from the colony defense fleet will arrive in 2 hours. But your ship is falling apart. Sunho smiled grimly. Then we will have to hold together for 2 more hours. A massive explosion rocked the ship, and several consoles erupted in sparks. Reports flooded in from throughout the vessel. Each one worse than the last. Engineering was on fire. Medical bay was overwhelmed with casualties. The fighter squadron had lost half its pilots in a desperate attack run that had only marginally damaged the enemy vessel, and still the humans refused to retreat. Yunseok found himself helping where he could, carrying wounded crew members to safety and relaying messages when communication systems failed. He was not a soldier, had never been trained for combat, but no one on the Indomitable seemed to care about such distinctions. If you could help. You helped in a burning corridor on Deck 4. He encountered a young engineer named Suyan, who was frantically working on a damaged bulkhead. Water was flooding in from a ruptured line, and the section was in danger of being completely submerged. I can seal it from inside, she said when Yunseok asked what she was doing. But I need someone to close the emergency door behind me. He understood immediately what she was asking. You will drown, he said. Suyan nodded, her face pale but determined. If I do not seal this breach, the flooding will spread to 3 more sections, and the ship will lose structural integrity. So this is the only way. There must be an alternative. There is not, she said simply. Please, observer. There is no time to argue, and my friends are counting on me. Before Yunseok could respond, she had already climbed through the access hatch into the flooding section. He watched through the small porthole as she worked, her movements quick and precise, even as the water rose around her. She looked up once and met his eyes through the glass, and she smiled, a real smile with no fear in it. Then she waved at him, a casual gesture that seemed to say goodbye and thank you, and please remember me, all at once. Yunseok closed the emergency door because she had asked him to, and because he understood now that humans did not make such requests lightly. He stood there for a long moment after the water covered the porthole, feeling something break inside his chest that he had not known existed. When he finally returned to the bridge, the battle had reached its climax. The Indomitable had managed to land several critical hits on the Keth engines, slowing the mothership's escape. But the cost had been terrible. 1/3 of the crew was dead or wounded. Entire sections of the ship were open to space. The main weapons array was down to 40% capacity. Commander G1 stood at her station still, refusing to sit despite her injuries, refusing to show weakness when her crew needed to see strength. All hands, she announced over the ship-wide intercom. This is the commander speaking. The chaos on the bridge seemed to quiet as people paused to listen. I know you're tired, G1 continued, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that lined her face. I know you are scared, and I know some of you are wondering if we will survive this day. She paused, and when she spoke again, there was iron in her words. I cannot promise you survival, but I can promise you this. We are standing between monsters and innocent people, and as long as one of us can still fight, those monsters will not pass. A ragged cheer went up from the crew, and Yunseok felt his own voice joining it without conscious thought. All power to forward weapons, G1 ordered. We are going to finish this. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Yun Siok's life. He watched humans perform acts of impossible courage and sacrifice. Watched them die with defiance on their lips. Watched them refuse to surrender, even when surrender was the only rational option. The ship's doctor, an elderly man named Juan, worked for 9 hours without rest, saving lives through sheer stubborn refusal to let death win. When a patient finally slipped away despite his best efforts, Yun Siok saw tears rolling down the old man's face, but then Juan wiped his eyes, took a deep breath, and turned to the next wounded crew member. There was no time for grief when others still needed him. That was when Yun Siok understood something fundamental about humanity. They were not fearless. They were not unfeeling. They loved fiercely and mourned deeply, and felt terror just like any other species, but they did not let those feelings stop them from doing what needed to be done. They kept going, kept fighting, kept sacrificing, because the alternative was to abandon people who needed them, and that was something humans simply would not do. The battle ended not with a dramatic explosion, but with a gradual stuttering of the Keth engines as the accumulated damage finally took its toll. The mothership was dead in space, unable to flee. When the colony defense fleet finally arrived to finish what the Indomitable had started, Commander G1 allowed herself to collapse into a chair only after confirmation came that the enemy had surrendered around her. The survivors of her crew began the long process of saving their ship and mourning their dead. Yun Siok looked at the damage reports and calculated that the Indomitable had lost over 400 crew members in the engagement. 400 people who had died fighting an enemy that was not even targeting their own world. 400 people who had given everything to protect strangers. He thought of Su Yan waving at him through the porthole, and he finally understood what it meant to be human. The assault began without warning, and Yun Siok found himself swept up in a wave of controlled violence unlike anything he had ever witnessed. Sergeant Minji's squad moved like a single organism, each soldier anticipating the other's actions without the need for verbal commands. When the Keth jammed their communications within the first 30 seconds of combat, the humans barely hesitated before switching to hand signals and somehow maintaining perfect coordination. This should not have been possible. Yun Siok's training told him that modern warfare required constant communication, that soldiers cut off from their command structure would become disorganized and ineffective, but these humans seemed to operate on instinct, reading each other's intentions through body language and shared experience. They flowed around obstacles, adapted to changing conditions, and covered each other's movements with a precision that rivaled the most advanced Valerine combat drones. A Keth warrior emerged from a doorway directly in front of Yun Siok, its forearms raising weapons that could tear through his unarmored body in an instant. Before he could even react, Private Dae-Jung was there, tackling the alien to the ground and dispatching it with a blade drawn so quickly that Yun Siok never saw the motion. "Keep moving, observer," Dae-Jung said with a grin that seemed wildly inappropriate for someone who had just killed another being. "Cannot have you dying before you finish your report." They pushed deeper into the settlement, fighting for every meter against enemies who knew they were coming. The Keth were not cowards, and they fought with the desperate ferocity of cornered predators, but they were also confused. Every species in the galaxy knew that rescue operations against hostage situations were cautious affairs, with negotiators and standoffs, and careful calculations of acceptable losses. No one had told the Keth that humans did not play by those rules. Yun Siok watched Minji lead her squad through a collapsing building because it was the fastest route to the community center, trusting that they would make it through before the structure fell. He saw two soldiers use their own bodies to shield a wounded comrade while dragging him to cover, taking hits that would have been avoided if they had simply left him behind. He observed a young woman named Corporal Yuna charge a Keth, heavy weapons position alone, drawing fire so her squadmates could flank the enemy. Fully aware that she might not survive the distraction, she did survive, barely. Her armor scorched and cracked, but her spirit unbroken. Why did you do that? Yun Seok demanded when he reached her position. Min Seok demanded when he reached her position. The probability of your death was extremely high. Yuna looked at him with something like pity in her eyes. Because my friends needed me to, she said simply, as if that explained everything, and perhaps Yun Seok was beginning to realize it did. They reached the community center and found the main entrance blocked by Keth warriors using children as shields. The aliens had learned that humans would not fire through innocence, and they were using that knowledge to create an impenetrable barrier. Any other species would have recognized the tactical stalemate and fallen back to negotiate. Minji did not even slow down. Corporal Han, take your fire team around to the east entrance, she ordered. Private park. You and Dae-yoon go high and find me a window on the 3rd floor. And I want options in 2 minutes. The soldiers scattered to obey. And Minji turned to Yun Seok. You wanted to observe human combat, she said. Watch this. She stepped out from cover, her weapon lowered, and walked toward the Keth position as if she were taking a casual stroll. The aliens hesitated, confused by behavior that made no tactical sense. One of them shouted a warning, but Minji just kept walking, her eyes fixed on a small girl being held at the front of the group of hostages. Hey there, little one, Minji called out in a gentle voice that seemed impossible coming from someone Yun Seok had watched kill 6 enemy combatants in the last hour. What is your name? The girl was crying, her face dirty with soot and tears. But she managed to answer, Subin, she whispered. That is a beautiful name, Minji said. Still walking forward, still holding the attention of every Keth in the area. I need you to do something for me, Subin, and it is going to be scary. But I promise you will be okay. The lead Keth finally recovered from its surprise and pointed its weapon at Minji. Stop moving or we kill her. It hissed in broken common. Minji stopped. But she did not take her eyes off the child. When I say go, Subin, I need you to close your eyes and fall down. And can you do that for me? The girl nodded, trembling. Go. What happened next occurred so fast that Yun Seok's 4 eyes could barely track it. Subin dropped flat to the ground just as Han's fire team burst through the east entrance. The Keth holding the children turned toward the new threat. And in that moment of distraction, Minji drew her sidearm and put a round through the lead alien's head. Chaos erupted, but it was human chaos. Controlled and directed soldiers poured through windows that Yun Seok had not even noticed being breached. The hostages scattered on some prearranged signal, clearing firing lines that the humans exploited with ruthless efficiency in 90 seconds. It was over 63 Keth warriors lay dead, and not a single hostage had been harmed. Minji knelt beside Subin and scooped the crying girl into her arms, holding her close and whispering reassurances while the child sobbed against her armor. You are safe now, she murmured. No one is going to hurt you ever again. Yun Seok stood in the middle of the carnage, surrounded by freed hostages who were embracing their rescuers and weeping with relief. His analytical mind was racing, trying to process what he had witnessed. The humans had accepted insane risks to save strangers. They had thrown away every tactical advantage to protect children they had never met. They had improvised solutions to impossible problems through sheer stubbornness and creativity, and they had won. Because they were stronger than the they. Keth, not because they had better weapons or superior numbers. They had won because they refused to accept any outcome where innocent people died. As the evacuation began and survivors were loaded onto shuttles, word came down from the Indomitable that the other two rescue teams had also succeeded. 2,000 colonists saved. With 0 civilian casualties, it was, by any objective measure, impossible. Yet the humans had done it anyway. Yunseok was still processing this when new orders arrived from Commander G1. The Keth mothership was attempting to flee the system, and if it escaped, it would return with reinforcements to raid again. The Indomitable was going to pursue alone against a vessel with twice its firepower. That is suicide. Yunseok said to Minji as they boarded the shuttle back to the carrier. The sergeant just shrugged. Probably, she agreed. But those raiders will hit another colony if we let them go. With more children like Subin, and we cannot let that happen. Yunseok had no response to that. He was beginning to understand that humans did not calculate war the way his people did. They did not weigh lives against strategic objectives or measure acceptable losses against potential gains. They simply refused to let evil win. No matter the cost to themselves, it was terrifying. It was inspiring. And as the shuttle docked with the Indomitable and the crew rushed to battle stations for an engagement they could not win, Yunseok realized that he was no longer just observing. He was hoping they would survive. Yunseok had never felt so insulted in his entire career as a military scholar of the Velarine Empire when his superior handed him the assignment. He thought it was a joke at first, but Commander Talveth's four pale eyes showed no humor as he explained that the Galactic Consortium needed observers to document human military capabilities. Humans of all species, the primitives who had stumbled into faster-than-light travel barely 2 centuries ago, were now being considered for consortium membership. And someone had to watch them and write reports about their combat effectiveness. That someone, apparently, was Yunseok. He stood before his commander in the tall crystalline halls of the Velarin Military Academy, his blue skin flushing slightly purple with embarrassment as Talveth continued speaking. You will embed with a human vessel for 1 standard cycle, the commander said, his voice flat and emotionless as all proper Velarine voices should be. You will observe their tactics, their weapons, their decision-making processes, and you will compile a comprehensive analysis for the Consortium Council. Commander, Yunseok replied, keeping his tone respectful despite his frustration. Surely there are senior scholars better suited for this task. There are, Talveth agreed without hesitation. But none of them wish to waste their time observing a species that still measures their history in mere thousands of years. And so the assignment falls to you. Yunseok wanted to argue further, but he knew better than to push against the superior's decision. The Velarin had survived for over 200,000 years by maintaining strict hierarchies and emotional discipline. And questioning orders was not something their culture tolerated, so he accepted the assignment, packed his observation equipment, and boarded a transport to the human frontier. The journey took 3 weeks, and Yunseok spent most of it reviewing everything the consortium knew about humanity. The files were thin compared to those of other species. Humans had originated on a death world called Earth, a planet with extreme temperature variations, dangerous predators, toxic plants, and a gravity that most species found uncomfortable. They had spread to other worlds quickly, almost frantically, as if driven by some internal force that would not let them rest. Their technology was crude but functional, their societies chaotic and divided, their lifespans tragically short. The average human lived only about 100 years, which seemed almost cruel to Yunseok, whose own species regularly reached ages of 800 or more. What could anyone accomplish in just a century of life? When his transport finally docked with the human carrier Indomitable, Yunseok prepared himself for disappointment. The ship would probably be dirty, disorganized, and staffed by emotional creatures who could barely control their primitive impulses. He straightened his formal robes, adjusted his data recorder, and walked through the airlock with all four eyes. Scanning for threats, what he found instead was a clean corridor filled with soft lighting, and a small group of humans waiting to greet him. At the front stood a woman of medium height with black hair cut short and eyes that seemed to smile even when her mouth did not. "Welcome aboard the Indomitable," she said, extending one of her hands in what Yunseok knew was a human greeting gesture. "I am Commander Park Gi-won, and we are honored to have a Velarine observer with us." Yunseok hesitated before accepting the handshake. Physical contact between species was unusual in consortium space, but humans seemed to consider it essential to social bonding. The commander's grip was firm and warm, and she did not seem intimidated by his height or his four eyes. "Thank you for receiving me, Commander," Yunseok replied. "I hope my presence will not disrupt your operations." Ji-won laughed, and the sound startled him. Velarin did not laugh, and most consortium species only made such sounds during moments of extreme emotion. "You are a guest, not a disruption," she said. "My crew will show you every courtesy, and you are welcome to observe anything you wish, as we have nothing to hide." This casual openness troubled Yunseok. In his experience, species that claimed to have nothing to hide usually had much to conceal. He followed Ji-won through the corridors of the ship, noting the details of human construction. The Indomitable was larger than he expected, with multiple decks dedicated to crew quarters, training facilities, medical bays, and recreational areas. This last category confused him the most. Why would a military vessel need spaces for recreation? "Your crew seems numerous," he observed as they passed groups of humans going about their duties. "We carry about 3,000 souls," Ji-won confirmed, "plus support staff, medical personnel, engineers, and now one very distinguished observer." She smiled again, and Yunseok found himself unsure how to respond. The Velarine military operated on efficiency, with minimal crew sizes and automated systems handling most functions. The idea of 3,000 people living together on a single ship seemed incredibly wasteful. Over the following days, Yunseok began his observations in earnest. He attended training exercises, reviewed tactical databases, and watched how humans interacted with each other. What he saw did not match his expectations. The humans were not the primitive savages he had been led to believe. They maintained their equipment meticulously, trained with dedication, and showed genuine competence in their various roles. But they also did strange things that made no sense to his analytical mind. They ate meals together in large groups, laughing and talking about topics that had nothing to do with their duties. They played games during their off hours, competed in athletic contests, and gathered to watch recorded entertainments from their homeworld. They touched each other constantly, with pats on shoulders and embraces and playful shoves that would have been scandalous among the Velarine. Most confusing of all, they seemed to genuinely care about each other. Yunseok watched a senior officer spend an hour helping a young recruit who was struggling with a technical problem. He saw crew members visit their sick companions in the medical bay, bringing small gifts and sitting by their beds just to talk. He observed Commander Ji-won walking through the ship every morning, greeting her crew by name and asking about their families and their concerns. None of this was efficient. None of this served any tactical purpose. And yet the crew of the Indomitable seemed more motivated and more cohesive than any military unit Yunseok had ever studied. He was still trying to understand this contradiction when the alarms began to sound. Red lights flashed throughout the corridor where he stood, and humans rushed past him toward their battle stations with practiced speed. Yunseok made his way to the command bridge, where he found Commander G1 staring at a holographic display with an expression he had learned to recognize as concern. "What is happening?" he asked. "We have received a distress signal from a colony world called New Bism," G1 replied, her voice tight but controlled. "Raiders from the Keth Syndicate are attacking civilian settlements." Yun Seok knew of the Keth. They were a brutal species that preyed on vulnerable colonies, stealing resources and taking prisoners to sell as slaves. The consortium had tried to suppress them for centuries without success. "What is your response?" he asked. G1 turned to face him, and for the first time he saw something burning in her eyes that he could not identify. "We are going to save those people," she said. "Every single one of them." The way she said it made Yun Seok feel something strange in his chest. Not doubt exactly, but uncertainty. He had come to observe humans in combat. Now it seemed he would get his chance far sooner than expected. The Indomitable tore through space at maximum speed, and Yun Seok could feel the vibration of the engines through the deck plates beneath his feet. He had never experienced a ship moving so aggressively, pushing its systems to the very edge of their limits. When he asked a passing engineer if this was safe, the young human just grinned and said that safe was not really the priority right now on the command bridge. Yun Seok observed the crew preparing for battle with a mixture of fascination and confusion. Commander G1 stood at the center of the controlled chaos, receiving reports and issuing orders with calm authority around her. Officers worked at their stations with focused intensity, but they also talked to each other, shared worried glances, and sometimes reached out to touch a colleague's arm in gestures of support. This emotional display would have been considered a severe breach of discipline in any Velorin military unit, yet somehow it did not seem to slow the humans down. "The situation is worse than we thought," G1 announced to her senior staff as new data came in from long-range sensors. The Keth have landed ground forces at 3 separate settlements, and they have taken over 2,000 civilians hostage. A tall officer named Lieutenant Commander Sung-ho slammed his fist against his console in frustration. "They are using the colonists as shields," he growled. "Standard Keth tactics. What does consortium doctrine recommend in this situation?" Yun Seok asked, genuinely curious about how humans approach such problems. G1 glanced at him with an expression he could not read. "Consortium doctrine recommends establishing a blockade and entering negotiations," she said. "The expected outcome is a partial release of hostages in exchange for allowing the raiders to escape with their stolen goods, with acceptable civilian losses estimated at 30 to 40%. "That seems reasonable," Yun Seok replied. "Minimizing overall casualties while preventing total loss." The bridge went quiet. Every human in the room turned to look at him. And for the first time since his arrival, Yun Seok felt unwelcome, acceptable losses. G1 repeated softly. "Those are someone's parents down there, and someone's children, and they are not acceptable losses to me." She turned back to her crew and began outlining a rescue operation that made Yun Seok's analytical mind reel with its impracticality. Small teams would drop to the surface in assault shuttles, infiltrate the 3 settlements simultaneously, neutralize the Keth forces, and extract the hostages before the enemy could react. The timing would need to be perfect. The risks would be enormous. The probability of success was, by any rational calculation, extremely low. "I need volunteers for the ground teams," G1 said. "This will be dangerous, and I will not order anyone into a mission like this." Yun Seok expected hesitation, perhaps some reluctant acceptance from those who felt obligated by duty. Instead, every single hand on the bridge went up. He stared in disbelief as humans throughout the room volunteered for what could easily be a suicide mission, not because they were ordered to, not because they had no choice, but because they wanted to save strangers they had never met. I would like to accompany one of the ground teams. Yun Seok heard himself say. The words came out before he could stop them. Surprising him as much as everyone else, Ji-won studied him for a long moment before nodding. You will go with Sergeant Kang Min-ji's squad, she said. Stay close to her and follow her orders exactly. An hour later, Yun Seok found himself in a cramped assault shuttle with 12 human soldiers. Hurtling toward the surface of New Business Sergeant Min-ji sat across from him. A compact woman with a scar running down the left side of her face and eyes that had seen too much death. She was checking her weapon for perhaps the 10th time. A ritual that Yoon Seok had observed many soldiers performing before combat. First time in a drop, observer? She asked without looking up. Yes, he admitted. Is it always this uncomfortable? Min-ji laughed. A short, harsh sound very different from Commander Ji-won's warm chuckle. The drop is the easy part, she said. It is what comes after that gets uncomfortable around them. The other soldiers were preparing in their own ways. Some checked equipment, some prayed quietly. Some simply sat with their eyes closed. One young soldier named Private Dae-young was showing photographs to his squad mate. Pictures of a woman and 2 small children. My wife and daughters, he explained when he noticed Yoon Seok watching. They live on a colony not so different from New Busan. Is that why you volunteered? Yoon Seok asked. Dae-young shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. Someone has to protect people who cannot protect themselves, he said. If not us, then who? The shuttle shuddered as it entered the atmosphere. And Yoon Seok gripped his restraints as the craft bucked and swayed through the turbulence. Red warning lights flickered. Alarms blared, and then suddenly they were through. Skimming low over forests and fields toward their target. 2 minutes to landing zone, the pilot announced over the intercom. Expect hot reception. Min-ji stood and addressed her squad one final time. Our objective is the community center where the Keth are holding 600 hostages, she said. We go in fast, we hit hard, and we get those people out. Because every single one of them is counting on us whether they know it or not. The soldiers responded with a unified shout that made Yoon Seok's ears ring. There was no fear in their voices. Only determination. The shuttle touched down hard in a clearing outside the settlement. And before Yoon Seok could even unbuckle his restraints, the humans were already moving. They poured out of the craft like water through a broken dam. Spreading into tactical formations with practiced ease, Min-ji grabbed his arm and pulled him along. A grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. Stay behind me, she ordered. Do not stop moving, and if I tell you to run, you run. They advanced through the streets of the settlement. Past burned buildings and abandoned vehicles, Yoon Seok saw bodies lying in the open. Colonists who had not been fast enough to escape the initial attack. Each one made the humans around him angrier, their movements becoming more aggressive. Their determination hardening into something that looked almost like rage. But it was not uncontrolled rage, it was cold and focused. A weapon forged from grief and pointed at those responsible. They reached the community center and found it surrounded by Keth warriors. Tall insectoid creatures with 4 arms and chitinous armor. Enemy had set up defensive positions and placed hostages at the windows as living shields. Any conventional assault would result in massive civilian casualties. What now? Yoon Seok whispered, seeing no way forward that did not end in disaster. Min-ji smiled. And there was something terrifying in that expression. Now we do what humans do best, she said. We improvise. She began issuing orders to her squad, adjusting the plan on the fly, finding solutions to problems that would have paralyzed a Velarine tactical computer. And Yoon Seok watched in amazement as the humans prepared to attempt the impossible.